Hello and welcome to the Chthonia Monday live stream. I am Breege Burke, the host of Chthonia podcast, and as per usual on these Monday live streams, I'm going to give a brief update of stuff going on with Chthonia, but then I'm going to actually get into a particular topic. And the topic I was initially looking at today was called Pre-Raphaelitism. I'm also just realizing that I didn't actually put up good morning, or good afternoon, or whatever time of day it is for you. I didn't actually put a promo up. Usually I put like join me at live stream at 12, and I realized I just totally didn't put that up today, but I've had a lot of other stuff going on. So I'm going to give you a little bit of my updates, and then I'm going to be talking about the subject today that came into my mind. It's actually somewhat interrelated to a bunch of other stuff that's been going on recently, or different activities that I've been engaged in. And it's the subject of what I'm going to call, for the moment, Pre-Raphaelitism. And it definitely connects to the idea of Saturn, because we're in Saturn retrograde right now. And also to the idea, these kind of competing ideas of Saturn as either representing order in the system or as representing total chaos. And some of this has to do with some of the work I'm doing over on my other side, Transition Life Coaching. Anybody who follows me over there knows that I do channeling of Archangel Azrael. And this has been a thing, and I won't re-explain the whole thing here. I do have a video on the transition.lifecoaching.net website. If you go to the blog page, I do actually have a Azrael video, or if you just go to that particular, if you just go to the Liminal Tarot page, and again, if you go to my transition.life.coaching Instagram account, I have it in the bio links, so it's right there. But yeah, so Liminal Tarot, I've been posting those. I think I'm up to session 5 with Azrael, and yes, good that you could join me today, and welcome to everybody who has joined so far. So I'm going to be posting the Azrael sessions there. Like I said, I've got to post number 5, and I'll probably be recording number 6 tomorrow. I usually do about 1 per week, but I also have, and I think I may have mentioned this, that I've also created some Enochian cards. Like they're meant to be kind of like oracle cards, but there's kind of this communication that I'm able to use. Right now I've gotten through like 120 nouns or something, and I still need to continue to do more of them. But I started working with them anyway. Because the indication I've gotten is that when I'm communicating with the angelic beings, they prefer to talk in their own language. So, and of course I am not proficient in Enochian. And also, interestingly, some of the things that have recently been coming through in that medium are, like if we look at the traditional way that language was translated by John Dee, there's a John D. Edward Kelly stuff from the Elizabethan era, which is actually where the Enochian language comes from, as far as we know. But one of the things I've noticed about Enochian is that when you have certain words that are translated, like if you can find, I think it's Iden Kelly's Enochian dictionary, and there's the different ones that will spell out, tell you what the words mean. You may find that the same word is used for different things in different contexts. So there is a case of there's certain words that keep coming up for me when I'm doing this that don't mean what that dictionary says that they mean. Okay, at least that's not what I've been told. So So anyway, I'm going to talk about the updates. And weirdly, okay, I don't know if the rest of you see this kind of light that's right here. There's no light in my room. Yes, I know there's a light in that window back there where the air conditioning is, but this room is dark. Like, I don't know where this light is coming from that's over my head. I was experimenting with different filters and contrasts and things to try to see if but it's just here, so I don't know. Maybe I'm angelic now. Woo. I don't know. But anyway, there's this weird light in here, so I don't know where that's coming from, and I'm just noticing it more and more as I look at myself. And hello, JR. It's good to see you here. Okay, so just quickly the updates for Chthonia, and then I'm going to delve more into this topic, which again might be a little bit complex, because you're awesome. You give off light. Thank you. That's kind of seems contrary to the kind of stuff that I do here, but anyway. Okay, so Chthonia. So if you're on Patreon, I'm going to try to do another special podcast this week for Patreon members. I always try to do one every week that's different, like on the off weeks because I only do Chthonia every other week. And the last one we did was on the Banshee. I haven't determined yet. I'm not doing my list in order. I'm being very chaotic about my list this year, so I have to figure out which one I actually want to do next. And I see hello. So I'm going to probably produce one. The last one I did was on the connection, women and the image of the devil, and so I did a podcast on that. Not this past week, but the week before. So there'll be a new one coming out this week. I have so much going on. Literally, one of the messages I'm getting is like, you got to work on your paid stuff. Don't spend so much stuff on your free stuff. So, because there's bills to be paid and stuff. So I need to kind of be a little bit more focused on that. But in any case, if you are interested in supporting my work and you're not on patreon.com/Chthonia, some of you here are Patreon members. You can consider going there, again, patreon.com/Chthonia, if you do want to support this work and get any of that extra podcasts, extra material, and other stuff. And then some of the classes and stuff that I'm doing, one of the benefits of membership over a certain level is some of those classes are free to people, a certain number of them. So, and speaking of Chthonia and online and websites and things, I've made the decision that, and I don't want to do it yet because I've paid for Bluehost, I think, in March or April, so it's only been a couple of months. But I am going to move Chthonia over to Wix because, especially when I'm looking into starting the school, I might do that by the fall because WordPress, it's got a lot of potential functionality, it's got a lot of plugins, but I'm finding it for my own purposes, it's overkill and it's clunky. Anybody who registered for classes previously through that horrific WordPress system where you had to log in and get a password, and then it's like you had to do your password this time and you did twice. It was the dumbest thing I've ever seen and the most user unfriendly. And I spent more time trying to help people through that and troubleshoot them through that when I took the Scholars of the Borderland down, I was just like, I just actually blew away MemberPress and blew away that whole registration and e-commerce system. So I'm actually going to trash it over on the Bluehost side, and again, I'm going to use Wix because Wix is that's what I have transitionlifecoaching.net. People love it. They said that the whole interface is easy to use and you can hold classes and it'll just automatically set it up and it'll automatically set up the registration and the costs and everything else. And it's so easy. Whereas on the other site, it's just like you practically have to, I don't know. I have a background in technology and it drove me nuts, like all the pieces that I had to try to piece together. So I feel like I'm doing old policy maps and library systems or something. It's just ridiculous how convoluted it was to use those systems just to put classes up. So with this, I actually have a lot more flexibility and a lot more freedom. So I'm going to move everything over to Wix, and it's going to be a whole lot cheaper because Bluehost is charging me something like $500 or $600 every couple of years just to have all of this stuff, and I'm just like, why? The website is there to have all the material, but I'm not necessarily on it every day. I do post to it now and again and so forth. And of course, that's where the podcast is. That's where the publications are. That's where the Chthonia books catalog is. And, but it's just for what I'm using it for right now. I'm like, I could definitely go with something a lot simpler and a lot less expensive. So just so people know that I'm going to change that. In terms of books, okay, I mentioned the books that I have for sale. Obviously, Regenerator is out. Project Lethe is out on Chthonia Books. I did find a typo in Project Lethe. I was looking at it last night. I found one typo and I'm annoyed. I had that thing edited to what. It's not so much that it's a misspelling, it's just the wrong word in the wrong place. So that just kind of irritated me. And there's a couple of the little inconsistencies. This happens. This is the problem with authors rereading their own work, is you go, I should have done that a little differently. But anyway, it's still a great story. I find myself rereading it just because I like rereading it. But Regenerator is also out, and that's a really great story. It's a great book. And then I'm going to be having my friend Ellen's book will be coming out this month. I'm actually hoping to set that up in Ingram today and get the template for making the cover, because she gave me all the material that I need for the cover. So now I'm going to start putting that together, and hopefully in the next week or so we will see. I can announce that book is coming out. That is an absolutely magnificent read. So and with beautiful illustrations. So that one I mean, such as it is when you're doing it print on demand, like they only somehow manage to, I don't know, they managed to take things and kind of dampen them down a little bit. Yes, I've got some good plans ahead. Yes, well, that's it. And then a lot of the work I'm doing on transition life coaching. I'm going to talk a little bit about that here. And believe it or not, this does dovetail into the topic that I'm talking about today. Oh, one last thing about books. I do have 2 copies of Death and the Maiden left at the $15, which would be like basically $10 for the book and $5 for shipping in USA only, because I can't, internationally it's a lot more. It's like closer to $20 to mail it. And also, I have 2 copies of Maeve, MEDB, if you wanted to get a copy of that. That one I'm doing for 10, so it's $5 for the book and $5 for shipping. In both cases, I would sign the book, so you have my signature on it, but I've got like a couple copies left. So I'm going to put links to that. I'm going to do updated Squarespace links, my inventory, so that if people want to order those, they can just order those directly, and then, of course, they'll get a confirmation, and then I will ship it and send them, put up a tracking number and all that kind of stuff. So like I did with the Death and the Maiden books. And it seems like everybody who I mailed them to has, some of them, at least some people have informed me that they've gotten it. So so that worked out okay. So yeah, I will have just a couple, I have some of those left, and I'm like, okay, I'm still trying to just clean out inventory and make some room. So, and it's only a couple of them. So I thought, okay, it's the last few. So let's just see if I can sell those off. Okay, so what's going on Transition Life Coaching? And some of you do watch my morning coffee with Breege, which I do over on that channel at 6:30 in the morning. Most days last week I had power out for 2 days, so that was, that seems to be, it was really funny. The day my electric bill was due, the power went out, and I was like, oh, I guess I can't pay the electric bill. I mean, I get so annoyed with Jersey Central Power and Light because they're part of this bigger company called First Energy. And they don't retain enough staff in the state of New Jersey. They just, so whenever anything big happens, like we have a storm and like a lot of lines are ripped down and stuff, they have to wait until crews can come in from like Ohio, which is like a 16-hour drive away. I mean, it's so annoying. So then we're out for like 2 days or more. Originally they were saying we weren't going back till Sunday, and I was like, God, be kidding me. I was giving a dream analysis class, which I gave, and it went really, very well. In fact, there may be some follow-up sessions to that. And I also had appointments, so I was like, hey, I can't be doing without this. My sister was going to very generously let me do them at her house in her spare bedroom, use that and use the internet over there. But as it turns out, they did manage to bring the power back by Friday afternoon. So, but I'm doing a lot of stuff. I'm going to be doing some in-person sessions back in Milford, where I was doing tarot readings and stuff. And I have been invited to do more of that, but I'm working more on healing stuff. And I've learned a new modality called Rouhani Celestial Healing, which I did talk about a little bit here, but and this is the thing that may dovetail into this topic a little bit. Because Rouhani, it's considered to be, now initially when you read about it, you're kind of like, oh, angelic, 5D, all this stuff, and you kind of immediately just go, oh dear. Because how many times do I hear that phrasing, and I'm just like, yeah, some of it just sounds a little too, I don't know. I mean, for somebody who's into the Chthonia, I'm not sure that this is kind of, and working with Chthonia deities, I'm like, yeah, I don't know about this. And I'm always suspicious of things that call themselves 5D, especially since I'm not into the whole idea of ascension. To me, it's like, okay, if we're expanding dimensions, like it might be an expansion. An ascension implies, we're leaving this terrible earth and rising up. And if you read Death and the Maiden, or if you're in the process of reading it, you're going to kind of get that I'm not really for the idea of let's all leave this terrible earth and go to some space out there. I'm like, no, you're here, and this is where you should be, and this is where you should be living your life and not worrying about being somewhere else, right? So it might be very surprising to people that I just find Rouhani to be absolutely, utterly, like mind-blowingly transformative. And because it actually does a lot of really deep alchemical kind of work. And I don't say this lightly. I mean, I'm somebody who is, as you know, I'm very academic. I mean, I kind of look at everything very, very analytically and very grounded. And initially when I read about it, I'm kind of like, this sounds a little lightweight for me too. But, I was introduced to it. I did a session, and I was just blown away. I've done energy work for 24 years now, and I was like, I've never experienced anything like that. So now I'm offering it on my site. I've actually taken the class. I have the Rouhani attunement, and so I have been doing it, and I've actually had a fair amount of clients. It seems to be something people are really interested in. And the results that people were getting, they're just like, holy crap, like, this was not very different from other types of healing, and just really, really works on a very, very deep level on whatever it is that people are trying to work on. And usually they say about 3 sessions are good, so I actually have a 3-session rate that's a little cheaper. And I am going to be doing it, like I said, in person. I'm going to be doing some sessions in Milford. And today what I was doing was actually recording some video that I'm going to make. I'm going to actually put a free informational video up. And I'm actually going to do some free informational sessions too, both in person and online, where people can get extra discounts if they do that. So, but this is just like, I've never experienced anything like it. And what I find particularly about Chthonia, the reason I think it's so interesting and so it's powerful, is that there's something alchemical about it. Okay, it works on a transformational level. So it's not so much about, oh, let's purge you of all your bad energy. It's about, no, let's take all the stuff, let's dig up all that stuff, the stuff that's blocking your heart, the stuff that's blocking your confidence level, the stuff that is, and that may be affecting you physically as well. People who have chronic physical ailments and things like that. Let's take that energy and transform it. Let's kind of go through this transmutation process and turn it into something else. In the same way with alchemy, like the whole idea of taking the filth of something and turning it into gold. Same kind of idea. And Chthonia does that, and it does it very effectively, although it's a process. So some elements of it, as you're working through it, can get very intense and kind of be a little bit jarring for people. If I know somebody's already been through jarring experiences, I try to do it in the sense I'm like, can we be a little more subtle here and not like, not like completely, this person's already been upended, like let's not upend them any further. And that generally does seem to work. One of the most stark things I had, it's on my other page, was that one of my clients does a lot with, she has a lot of devices for measuring electromagnetism and fields and energy fields and biometrics and stuff like that. And she had a new machine she wanted me and my other friend to test out. So it's one way you kind of put your finger in each of the things, and it reads like your kind of electricity, your biomap. And it puts out a report about your stress level, how imbalanced your organs are. And it's weird because she was going through something very stressful, and she was like off the charts with her stress when she did it for herself. So I did Chthonia on her, and she says, well, I'm going to go now, and I'm going to do that machine, and I'm going to see. And unbelievable. I mean, complete like difference from what she was before. All of her off the chart level, everything went back to optimal, and everything went back in line. And she was just like, whoa, that was, and she literally felt like 100% better. So it's very interesting in how it does that, but it doesn't do it through necessarily, it can open up and release stuff, but it transmutes. Now, I'm tying this in with this idea of what I call Pre-Raphaelitism, and maybe I need to explain what I mean by that. Now, Pre-Raphaelitism, okay, if we think about Pre-Raphaelite, this kind of, if we think about the art movements and so forth, and we think about what was happening during the Victorian era, if you think about like your Waterhouse paintings, right? You have these very beautiful paintings of the women, the Lady of Shalott. They all have hair that's probably better than mine, but it's like that long kind of look, with the long, curly kind of very romantic style. That you see, where they painted Lilith, and they've painted some of these other ones, but they paint them, or Circe or Kirke, but they paint them in these ways that are very seductive and very beautiful. Like they're not painted in these kinds of more starkly realistic. They're very romantic. They're very soft, right? And so it kind of creates this romanticized vision of either certain stories or narratives or figures. And when I was taking, I've talked about that Victorian poetry class I took back in the 90s, that was just, again, very powerful with Dr. William Dell. One of the things he used to talk about, he was actually talking about Disneyland in this sense, but he said he didn't like Disneyland because he said it's Pre-Raphaelitism. He says, it's all Pre-Raphaelitism. I fucking hate it. It's Pre-Raphaelitism. That's what he used to say. And what he meant by that was that it's this idea of trying to create this perfect utopia or golden age. And when we start talking about golden ages, there's a couple of things. Politically, we can talk about movements that are interested in moving us to some kind of a better time. Okay, there's always thought about that. Let's return to the good old days when I don't know, when whatever it is that you think was better than now was happening. So, I mean, that idea of the golden age can come out of a sense of nostalgia. So it can come out of this, like if you had like a great and happy childhood, and let's just say your adulthood is very trying, then you might just say, oh, you know, I long for the good old days, you know, when I didn't have to worry about things. And, you know, we all have stuff like that, right? But sometimes we also have that romantic extension to the rest of life around us. You know, that was the day when everything was good. Now everything's terrible, right? That kind of way of thinking. But, you know, that good old days way of thinking. And the reality is that there is no good old days. If you really, like, I grew up in the 70s. I mean, and for me, you know, there was, well, again, when I reflect on my childhood as an adult, there's probably some things that were like, but generally speaking, for the most part, I was a happy kid. So I tend to look at the 70s with some fondness. However, if I really look at the stuff that was going on at that time, I'm kind of like, oh, there's some things that were going on that, yeah, not so great, you know? But I wouldn't have been aware of them as a child. You know, as a child, that would have been something outside. I mean, you think about how it might have influenced you, but then over time, it just kind of, I don't know, as you get older, and you look at the whole broader, you know, political, social context and everything, you're like, wow, was a lot of upheaval then. There was actually a lot of stuff going on for women that wasn't good then. You know, there was a lot of just different things, and some things that were good too. But it's, so, you know, we tend to have this vision of things. And this kind of brings me to thinking about Saturn, because right now, okay, astrologically, Saturn is going retrograde. Okay, so here's my little astrology thing right here. But I am going to talk a little bit about Saturn as a deity here. And the idea that when we talk about Saturn going retrograde, right now Saturn is in Aquarius after, and usually, and actually traditionally Aquarius is one of the signs associated with Saturn. Now Aquarius is associated more with, I think, Uranian energy, like Uranus is more associated with that. But Saturn is, you know, in the traditional, when you had the 7 planets, you know, when you didn't go beyond Saturn, he was definitely considered to be the ruler of that, as well as the ruler of Capricorn. But Saturn will be retrograding back into Capricorn. And Capricorn, of course, is definitely, like, in terms of tarot, we're talking about symbols of death. We're talking about, the devil card is associated with Capricorn. In Vedic astrology, we talk about Makara, which is another name for Saturn. And so it, you know, I'm sorry for Capricorn, not for Saturn. But it's, but there's this, and these are all seem to be, you know, centered around these ideas of death. But at the same time, because Saturn also is associated with time. Okay, Saturn is Kronos, and so archetypically he's the Senex, he's the wise old man, right? And he's the wise old man that that tends to be associated with time. And in Jungian psychology, there's like this, what they call the puer-senex kind of axis. So puer being boy, which is more like, puella is more like the child, okay, that childlike energy that's full of adventure and full of risk-taking and a lot of highly energetic, as opposed to this senex energy, which is more, you know, it's slower, it may be more depressive, it's more about old age and the wisdom of age, you know, but also, you know, the kind of slowing down, that vigor of youth has kind of, you know, gone away or slowed down. So the two of them kind of operate on axis. In fact, they used to talk about that as the bipolar axis, the manic depressive axis, because it would be kind of moving from this very high energy state to this extremely low energy depressive state. So Saturn has that because of his association with time, has that association with that type of archetype. But interestingly, Saturn is the one who rules the Golden Age. Okay, when we talk about the ages of, according to Hesiod or according to Ovid, they always talk about this Golden Age, which is kind of the first age, when maybe the first humans and certain other beings kind of lived this almost godlike existence. You know, where the mortals and the immortals, you know, kind of interacted with each other, and everything was, you know, beautiful and abundant and plentiful. And then, of course, as you move to the Silver Age, and then you move to the Bronze Age, and then you move to the Iron Age, you start moving. I mean, we do have those technological ages in archaeology and so forth. but then we start moving more and more into this space where where things get worse and worse, where things get more and more corrupt, right? Where people are more and more corrupt. They don't honor the gods the way they should. If we think about the flood mythology of the Bible, I mean, that was supposed to be when we were moving into an age, and I can't remember if I think it was connected more to the Silver or Bronze Age, but the idea was that, mankind or humankind had become corrupt, so they had to be washed out and let's start all over again, right? There's that idea and that way of thinking about things. And that's interesting too, because Saturn tends to be, okay, so more positively he's connected with that golden age. He's also in terms of the underworld connected with the Elysian fields. Saturn is the ruler of the Elysian fields, which seems like, rather cushy job for somebody who was devouring all of his children. But Saturn, so Saturn is actually quite a complex figure. Now, astrologically, when we look at Saturn, we think of Saturn as representing, as it was couched by James Hillman. I think it was John Wilson who posted it this morning. He has this thing called Jung in the World, and I was reading it. He has a Substack, and I at least get the free version. And he was saying that Hillman would talk about Puer and Senex as being chance and system. Okay, so Saturn ends up representing the system. It represents what's established. So when we think of Saturn in Capricorn, we're thinking about, oh yes, the kind of thing that's been established, our financial systems, our capitalistic systems, our economic systems, all that's established. And that Saturn going retrograde, first of all, it slows things down, okay, because Saturn energy tends to work more slow and plodding and methodical, quality over quantity, taking your time with things. That's the way that's established to be. So we tend to look at that like Saturn moving backwards into this space. Again, this kind of regressing into this space, back briefly into this Capricornian space, and then finally moving into Aquarius. Again, kind of moving backwards and then moving forwards again. But when Saturn moves back into that space, it's like we're revisiting that. And for some people who associate their values with that, then that would be that sort of return to that golden age, right? But Saturn has to do with something else, and that has to do with dissolution, and it has to do with chaos. Now, this book, I was reminded, because this is The Cult of the Black Cube. This is a Theon publication, and in the introduction to that by Tomas Vincente, I think I'm saying his name right, he talks about this idea of Saturn as the black sun, and I just want to read a paragraph from this because it's just really interesting to me. Because he talks about the idea of Saturn as the dark sun. He said, what are we saying here? A Syriologist dedicated the study of omen manuals of Mesopotamian astrology, like the canonical series Enuma, Anu, Enlil, have long puzzled over the fact that omens relating to the sun often turn out to be coded references to Saturn. Saturn and the sun are frequently interchangeable. And in this case, he's talking about Saturn as the idea of being the black sun. Saturn was regarded as a dark reflex of the sun at night, a notion later echoed in Greco-Roman and Vedic sources, which depend ultimately on Babylonian astrology. And it was the malefic nightly manifestation of the sun god, right? And he says this profound insight was reflected much later in the symbolism of the alchemists, for whom black lead, the Saturnine metal, is gold in potentiality. Okay, so there's that alchemical piece. We're going to bring in alchemy into this, right? So he talks about the appearance of Saturn here. So he talks about the exaltations. He says, when the exaltation of the sun in Aries, the beginning of spring, the exaltation of Saturn is Libra, which is the beginning of fall. In other words, when the power of the sun wanes in the universe, the reign of Saturn begins. Now, that's interesting because we're actually moving into that point of decline now. I was talking about Krishna Paksha this morning, which is where we move into the dark half of things. And that is what we're moving towards. Once you hit the summer solstice, you've hit the peak. And now, probably by next week, that's when you'll start to see differences, just minor differences in the light. And things are going to start moving in the direction towards autumn. The equinoctial constellation Libra, the scales, represented the balance of life and death, of light and dark, on which the justice of the cosmos depended. As twin stars, the sun light and Saturn dark maintained this cosmic equilibrium. Saturn's influence was ambivalent. Sometimes his nightly appearance presaged positive omens for the king and empire. In other contexts, Especially in conjunction with Mars, he can signal death and calamity. So it rules the months of the sun's decline, the autumn equinox, the winter solstice, and is recognized at the time of the Roman Saturnalia festival, December 17th through 23rd. One of the houses of Saturn is the goatfish, Capricorn, the sign occupied by the sun at the winter solstice. When the sun enters Capricorn, it quote-unquote dies, in inverted commas, and passes into the Chtonic depths. The curious symbolism of the goatfish dates to at least the 2nd millennium BCE. The fish and the goat were totems of the god Ea, the lord of Absu, the subterranean waters. Boundary markers preserve the early iconography of Capricorn as a goatfish surmounted by a ram-headed staff. Ea, or in Sumerian Enki, was imagined as the source of fertilizing river waters which erupted from the dark depths of the earth. The goat and the ram represented sexual fertility and power, while the fish alluded to the primal origin of this power, the great mother Tiamat, who birthed the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Together, the goat and the fish encapsulated the mystery of life's emergence from primal chaos. At the winter solstice, the sun must dissolve back into the watery subterranean depths so the cycle of cosmogenesis can begin anew. Saturn, the harvester, the ruler of Capricorn, decapitates the sun with his cosmic scythe. The Roman Saturnalia was at once the celebration of fertility, a return to the Golden Age, and a celebration of the death of the ordered universe of the Olympians, a momentary return to chaos expressed through the carnivalesque flouting of social conventions. Saturn is, in essence, a god of liminality, the guardian of the gateway between life and death, who alternately consumes and regurgitates the gods of light and rational order. Okay, so this is really interesting. And yeah, this is in the Cult of the Black Cube, just so people know. Some of you may already own this book. And that's just from the introduction, just a few bits. But yeah, so, okay. So that kind of frames what we're talking about a little bit here with Saturn and with alchemy, because when we have the alchemical knowledge idea of the black sun that Ficino talks about, that black sun is that, that has to do with the dissolution of things. Okay. So what does this have to do with all this other stuff that I've been kind of talking about? Well, for one thing, when I've been doing the Azrael channelings over on the other channel, on the other yeah, I guess it is a channel, right, over on YouTube, doing the Azrael channelings. One of the things that he's mentioned, I've mentioned this sort of in passing, on the other live stream, and it was that some of the message that were coming through the Enochian cards. One, first of all, with a lot of people, we're just going to stick talking about the USA right now, because I realize there's stuff going on, like there's elections in Britain and there's other things that are going on. But certainly there's the Biden-Trump rematch, right, that's going on in the USA. And the message that I got about that, and again, I get a lot of people who ask about it, like who ask me to do readings on it, will say, hey, who do you think is going to win, da, 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 and, you know, and I know some of you here, we've talked, and you've gotten these questions as well. And the message I got very strongly was neither. It's not going to be either one of them. It's not going to be Biden, it's not going to be Trump. And which is a very bizarre thing to say, because it's like, well, then who's it going to be at this point? I mean, the nominating conventions happen this month, and I think for the Republicans, and they happen next month for the Democrats. And then it was interesting because the day that we had the power outage here, which was the 27th of June, a few days before that, like literally 4 days before, I kept getting the number four, and it was like, no, and something in 4 days. 4 days is going to be important here. And I was like, okay, like I don't know what they mean. They just come up and I'm like, all right, that's what it says. That's what he says. That's what's coming up. And then 4 days turns out, yeah, that was the day, not only that my power was out, but it was one of the days that it was out. And I was visiting my sister, and I said, well, when's this presidential debate? She was like, oh, it's tonight. And it happened to be, whatever day it was 27th, 28th, it happened to be the day of the presidential debate, which was day 4. And they said, yeah, something about that's going to be significant. And it's really interesting because they had the debate, and now there's this discussion as to whether or not Biden's actually going to be the candidate. Okay? Like whether or not they're going to try to replace him with somebody else. I mean, they still might not. I'm not suggesting that, like, hey, you know, this is definitely a prophetic hit or something like that. 'Cause I don't know yet. But, and as far as the Trump side goes, I mean, I don't know what that, I mean, I suppose there's some different possibilities as to why that might not work out. Probably connected to his convictions in some way, but you know, I don't know. I just really don't know. But that's what comes up. And from what I've heard from people, they said, no, you're actually not the first person to get that idea. I know several astrologers were looking at the charts of both of them and said, it's not really showing either one of them as being president. So, yeah, so just interesting. And I bring it up just because when I look at that particular contest, I feel like this is a revisiting of that Capricorn era that we're moving out. Remember, Pluto's also been in Capricorn. So it's kind of like all of the upheaval that's connected with that. It's either, you know, on that spectrum, it's either authoritarianism or it's just politics as usual, centrist politics as usual, you know, which is kind of the way that it seems to be. And really, we're looking at a new generation that's kind of, you know, want something different. You know, we don't want somebody telling us what to do, and at the same time, we don't want to just do business as usual. You know, you want a chance for real change to be made. And of course, I think it's dubious as to whether or not any government's going to really ultimately make that much change. You can change laws, but fundamentally, people have to change. Really, you know, I don't know. You can. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that changing laws is bad necessarily, but it's just I don't know in terms of massive revolution how much that really, and also massive revolutions how much they really work. So in any case, but again, it's really interesting that was coming up. But the other thing that came up in those Azrael sessions was the idea that he was talking about Lilith energy, and he also kept using the word Babylon a lot, and that's why I kept going back to that. And I'm like, now Babylon, as it was translated in the, like if you look at Iden Kelly's dictionary, he translates Babylon as being the word wicked. Okay, because obviously people think of the Whore of Babylon, and of course, if you're a Thelemite, you know the whole Thelemic mythology around Babylon. But from what I understand, that when that term has been used with me, it's like, no, it's not. We're not talking about wickedness. We're talking about Babylon in the sense of dissolution. Okay, it's the Sephiroth of Bina. It's the dissolution that's going on. So in other words, kind of the message that I was getting here was that there was this idea that things are kind of in a state of dissolution. Okay, whatever that's going to mean. I'm not going to try to predict any outcome as to what that means. But I keep getting like, you know, we're in a state of dissolution. Like there's something that is not going to be like it was before. And that's just something I said, well, that's the, I'm the messenger. I'm just telling you what's been said. And I mean, although it does feel to me like we are moving into this shift. I mean, when I look at that with respect to Chthonia as a whole concept and a podcast and a, you know, set of publications, set of whatever it is that I'm doing with the Chthonia as a whole proprietary thing. It is about the ways in which we need to embrace the dark feminine. And so when I see this thing about either Babylon or Lilith energy kind of coming in and saying, you know, and basically, literally what I got was, it will be hard for people who have not shown sympathy to the dark feminine, or sympathy wasn't the word. It was more like, if there's been no understanding of the dark feminine, then it's going to be hard. Okay, that was what I got. And that was a rather surprising message to me coming from that particular milieu, but that's what was said. And that this shift is going to be a shift into more feminine energy. And that dark feminine energy, just like the Saturn energy, is an energy of dissolution. Okay, it's an energy of saying, because a lot of people are being confronted, because like I said, what I do over on Transition Life Coaching is what I do with people one-on-one, as opposed to what I kind of do collectively here on Chthonia. There seems to be this sense that people are being confronted with things. It may be stuff just in their individual lives. It may be things about your life path, maybe things about your relationships or your job or whatever. People are facing these kinds of things. It could be family stuff. There's a lot of different ways in which, because obviously there's a lot of different aspects to life, right? There's a lot of ways that change could manifest. It could be something on a bigger scale. You know, how certain changes politically or socially or whatever affect you and affect your life and affect your decisions. And there's a big kind of push-pull with regard to that kind of thing. As society tries to expand and tries to broaden, back to our Roman Empire thing, right? The bigger the population, the more diverse a population you have, the more that there needs to be a kind of secularism that allows, if you're going to call yourself a free society, that allows everybody to do their own thing. And to be their own thing within the bounds of law. Like, if your thing is to go out and like murder people, then no, that's not within the bounds of the law. So you don't have a right to do that, right? But there's this definite energy here of, and there has been a pushback that let's go back to the good old days when we only had two options, and there was just this, there was just men, and there was just women, and we didn't have all these other people. And it's like, well, yeah, actually you did. Those people just had to like hide or were very much persecuted. So it's it's not that things were necessarily any different. It's more of an element of awakening. And I was talking a little bit this morning about epiphanies and about how you can you have an aha moment, or you can awaken to something. And so there's almost like an awakening that's going on. But it's funny because people call it being woke, right? They talk about wokeism, but and people who are anti-woke. And it's like, well, I mean, I think there's this kind of push-pull that's going on, both on that more national and global scale in terms of how societies are dealing with change. And there's this clear dissolution that's going on regardless of whether somebody wants that change or not. That's the strong Uranian energy, because that was the other aspect of it too. Uranus is often associated with the Tower card if you read tarot. And it's the idea that the old structures are being dissolved, they're being torn down, and you either have to move into that, away from that Senex energy, into that Puer energy, into that energy of like, no, I'm gonna move into this new space and I'm gonna do the new thing. Or you're going to, or you could end up being kind of ground up with what's going on before, which I don't know. Maybe that sometimes, if you look at it from an esoteric standpoint, it's not necessarily the worst thing to happen to you. I mean, may not be pleasant, but at least it will eventually something new comes out of it, or something redone. So I just think it's interesting that Chthonia is the thing that I've been really drawn to, because in spite of how it's described, I'm like, it is alchemical. It literally, what I find is happening, at least for me personally, and what at least the people who I've been working with in it, what seems to be happening is just, it's pulling all that material out. It's pulling all of those ideas and things about who we are and who, and the things that, those areas where we're very comfortable, where it's like again, it's literally the Capricorn, the devil, it's literally the stuff that's like, okay, this is causing me suffering, this needs to change, but sometimes we identify with the suffering, I guess, and we kind of want to stay in that one place. So this is about saying like, yeah, well, it's time to stop identifying with the suffering, even if there's something nostalgic about identifying with that suffering. When the new thing is unfamiliar and seems scary, then the old thing that you hated somehow looks better. It's kind of like, oh, we want to go back and we want to do the old thing. And we all do that. And it's like, that's what I find is happening. It's like, it's pulling all those resistances up. And like I said, so you can go through periods of, when I'm doing the Chthonia, I can go through periods that I feel like absolutely like really motivated and joyful. And some other places where I'm like, I can just feel this total freak out going on in my body. And I'm like, what's going on? But it's kind of like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. That's just working through, because it's that aspect of you that doesn't want to change. And again, if you're an earth sign, it's just like you especially don't want to change, or just like, I mean, you do and you don't, or it becomes, oh, well, I've talked about this a lot on the live stream. Oh, I'll change when, once I get these 5 things in order, then it'll be okay to change. That's not the energy of what's going on right now. It's just kind of like, nope, it's time to go, it's gonna, It's kind of like roll with the change or have it roll over you kind of thing. It really feels like that kind of energy that's going on for a lot of people right now. Some Generation X stuff, you're saying. Yeah, I suppose. Being a Gen Xer, there's kind of this, I don't know, that's interesting. I don't know, I think every generation, when we think about it, we think about the boomers, or we think about, the different ones who came forward. Certainly the people who were around in the 60s, right? Now in the late 60s, where there was these big shifts and changes that went on in society, where there were revolutions, or people wanted to have revolutions, or didn't want to do things the same old way, and wanted to upheaval of the economic systems and stuff. And how many of those people, picked up the 80s Wall Street life, It's, what was it? What was that song? First I was a hippie, then I was a stockbroker. It was like, then I was a hippie again. I think that was the Bobs. Yeah, that was a very silly thing, but that's what a lot of people do. It's sort of like the there's the system there, and there's the system, and especially if people feel that they can make a lot of money at the system. And if that becomes, when that idea of security becomes more of the thing, rather than, say, changing society, or, that's what we can say. We can become very socially, we can stand there and be outraged about certain things. And, we can get a bumper sticker, or we can get a ribbon, or we can get something. And it's like, but that's about as far as it goes, right? I mean, when it comes to making the big changes, humans as a species you might have certain individuals to do that, but you don't have that as it's not a human trait. Even if you are, putting all astrology aside, it's not necessarily a human trait to want to change things on a bigger scale. Like, we can talk about climate change or pollution, or or things like that, but the idea of yes, but giving up convenience for that, right? To say, like, well, we should do things a whole different way, and then people are just like, I don't want to do that. That's too much work, because a lot of these things that we take for granted, it's because they make our lives more convenient, or we feel more settled, or we feel more secure. But the idea is that but things are dissolving, and the card that I keep getting when I do, and I don't think I have this deck handy right now, but I have the Osho Zen Tarot. There's the Nine of Cups card, which, if anybody knows tarot, that's like the wish card, right? Or it's at least the card of self-satisfaction, because it usually, in the Rider-Waite-Smith, you have the guy, there's all the cups behind him, and he's sort of more on the plump side, and he's sitting there, and he's folding his arms, and he's got this thing. But as it was pointed out, somewhere they said, yeah, but he's one of the 4 cards where the character has the arms crossed across the chest. And that means I'm not open. I'm not open to change. Okay? And so the Nine of Cups came up in that deck. And in that deck, it's actually called the Laziness card. Because what it does is it shows a guy sitting there. It's actually, he's got like a black and white checkered floor in front of him, which is interesting. But he's kind of sitting back like in a beach chair, and he's got the pina colada. But behind him, everything is breaking up. And that comes up a lot recently. It's just the idea that, everything is breaking up. And so, like, weirdly, when I'm doing this kind of angelic stuff, when I'm doing this stuff with Archangel Azrael, the messages I keep getting is, everything is breaking up. And that, to me, that sort of makes sense in the terms of the dark feminine, because it's like, okay, there's this Lilith energy, or there's this Babylon energy. It's this grinding energy. It's going to grind up and everything's going to be done a new way. The old systems are just not going to be there anymore. Now, if that particular prediction does turn out to be true, that either Biden or Trump ends up running, that is going to be somewhat chaotic, because it's going to be like, okay, so what now? Because we've just had our primary process where, people have already, the candidates were already put forward in the primaries, and people have already voted for the candidates, or voted uncommitted in case of some people who were not happy with Biden. it's like, so now what? On the Republican side, aside from Trump, everybody else has dropped out. So what would be the alternative there at this point? And most people are saying, well, there just couldn't be. But I don't know. It's really interesting that there's this. And again, I still don't have any idea how that's going to play out. Or even if it necessarily will play out in that way. But that I just thought that was curious, that I just keep getting a lot of things about, like, there's, and the word harvest kept coming up too in Enochian, the word harvest. It was just kind of like, yeah, like the idea that something's being harvested. And to me, that's also very Saturnian. It can also have to do with death as well, because we think of Azrael as the angel of death, right? But there's this idea, something's being harvested, something's being kind of turned over, and it's going to be, again, they said there's going to be a lot of this kind of dark feminine energy that's coming forward. And to me, that is definitely energy that has to do with, it blows up our idea. If Saturn is time, then this is something that devours time. Kala is time, and Kali devours it, right? There's this blowing up of time. And the way in which maybe we're used to doing things is kind of being blown up. So, I don't know. These were just interesting reflections I had, but they kind of go back to the idea of Pre-Raphaelitism and the idea that we are, that somehow we're going to go back to a golden age. Or that somehow, or there's this nostalgia for something either that represents childhood, or that represents an idealized past, or represents this period of time where everything was great, everything was perfect then. Now everything's all messed up. Now, kids today aren't what they used to be, right? You've heard that. Where are we? It just seems to me that I don't, regardless of how I look at it, whether I look at those messages, maybe if you're not sure about those messages, maybe you take them with a grain of salt, okay, which is fine, that's fair. But even if you look at it astrologically, or even if you just look at it in terms of what's going on in the socio-political dynamic, just from a point of view that doesn't take any of that into account, if you look at all of it, it's like, yeah, there's some significant shifts going on, and I feel like there's shifts that we would like to sidestep, but they just feel like there's something becoming inevitable here. And as I think I was starting to say about Chthonia, that I started it because I always say to people, there needs to be an embracing of the dark feminine, right? There needs to be an understanding of this energy and the ability to work with this energy, not work against it. And I feel like it's almost like saying, yeah, well, this is kind of the time where we're going to see where that energy, where that's going to help us, where it's going to become useful. Energy goes where energy flows, you say. Yeah, well, that's just it. And the question is, but also it's not just about that. It's also about where is energy not flowing? Like, where has it been stopped? And where is that stoppage going to be pulled out? And I just feel like there's just like a lot of things that are kind of being ripped up right now. It's like the old script is being kind of torn up and thrown away. But in the meantime, we're kind of still facing these challenges of, okay, did you learn anything from where you've been? And what is this going to tell you about where you're going? And what can we, and where we're going is uncharted territory. It's not a way we've done things before. You hear that phrase a lot, like with a lot of things. I mean, like I said, just getting away from anything esoteric. If I happen to watch stuff on the news, or if I happen to watch any particular podcasts or anything that deal with politics or social stuff, literally the phrase you always hear from the legal people and stuff is like, well, we're in uncharted territory. We're in uncharted territory. This has never happened before. We're in uncharted territory. We hear this a lot. And what's uncharted territory? What's uncharted waters? I mean, that's where you face the feminine, right? That's where the speaking of Tiamat, or speaking of any kind of creature, that it tends to be that devouring feminine creature of the depths. It's kind of like, yeah, now you're kind of in uncharted waters. You don't know where you're going, and your old way of managing things, or your old maps or whatever, just don't seem to be the thing that's going to show you how to go forward. So I don't know. I feel like we're moving into a very interesting space here, and I feel like that Saturn energy, because of this kind of dual nature of it, it's like, it's okay. Saturn may represent time and slowness, and I think a lot of people in astrology tend to think of it as like, oh, well, this is us kind of being pulled back to the past and doing the same old thing, but I don't think that's necessarily how we need to look at it. It may be just kind of saying, okay, it's kind of like we're almost going back, and there's like almost this you're going back to something, but you're also dissolving what it was. There's like this breaking down of what the structure is. So it's almost like kind of like when you mow the lawn. It's like you go over a spot and then you go over it again a couple more times just to make sure you got it. It's like there's something. I feel like this is going to be more. There's more energy here of dissolution, and I don't know what else this is ultimately going to mean on a mass scale. Obviously, like I said, I do the stuff over on the Liminal Tarot channel, where whenever I do these sessions, I record them for better or for worse. I know some people have been watching them and they say, well, it's brave of you to put those out there. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, it is something that feels very weird to me because, as I said, I do tend to be very academic, and I tend to be very, I tend to look at things from definitely a more grounded, maybe a slightly more skeptical approach. But at the same time, I say, okay, this is something that's happening to me. One of the things I don't know if I've mentioned on this live stream is that Azrael session 4 that I did, that one was really quite interesting because I actually fell asleep and I thought I fell asleep for like a half an hour. So I fell asleep for like 3 minutes. But during that time that I fell asleep, there's a voice. There's somebody's talking there, and that ain't me. It ain't, my mouth ain't moving. It ain't me. It's in the room, but it wasn't there at the time. So there's, so I don't know. I mean, when I have that, there's days when you do stuff like that and you think, right, like, am I pulling this out of my backside? am I somehow making this up in my head? But although it's not all of it's the kind of stuff I would say, but it's just stuff that comes up. And then after that, I was like, oh, okay, no, that kind of tells me that this is not something I'm making up in my head. And that might have actually even been the purpose of it. I'm like, yeah, you're not making this up in your head. So, so I don't know. It's fascinating to me. There's a lot of things about it which are rearranging my own view on reality and my own way of thinking and looking at things. It's weird that the Rahanis come in for me at this time, at a time when I feel like I'm transmuting something. Like, it's like, okay, however I may have moved forward, or however I may talk about different ways of doing things, there may be a lot of ways where I'm not doing things a different way. So I'm actually just kind of working towards, like trying to figure out what all this transmuted stuff's going to mean. But it's kind of a little bit of a rocky business of doing it. But I am very glad to have the Rahani, because I feel like, in spite of the lightweight way in which it's described, it kind of goes back to something. I had posted a question here. It was something that was on the What Would Eris Do Facebook page. And the idea was that, okay, when we look at Tantra, when we look at these different systems where certain initiatory acts are about violating taboos, right? So violating sex taboos, violating drinking taboos, violating smoking of ganja and things like that, eating certain foods that maybe were forbidden to certain people, engaging or eating polluted foods like leftover foods, which in that system you don't, like, you would never offer leftovers to the gods unless you're talking about Matangi. And so there is this idea of when these things are no longer considered taboo, then what's the next thing? And somebody had actually said, well, maybe the next thing is just about love. And that again, when you hear that sounds, I think the word tends to be used in context and overused in context where we think, whatever, how many times have I heard of that before? It sounds almost hokey to some people, love is the answer. Okay. And to be honest, that's kind of the way I frequently just kind of like yeah, what does that mean? That's a word that everybody throws around, and what does it actually mean, right? But I think that when I thought about it, I'm like, no, that might actually be what it is, because when we're looking at a method that actually is about heart opening, okay, kind of a method of healing that's about heart opening. Heart opening is much harder than you think it is. It's like you think it's just like, oh, okay, my heart's open and now I love everybody. It's like, no, it's all the crap that made you shut your heart down to begin with. All the people who, all the bad relationships you were in, all the people who betrayed you, all the people in your family who didn't accept you, all the people who, it's all that kind of stuff. And it's like, now it's like, it's just coming up, and it's almost like you're, but you're not just throwing it, you're transmuting it. You're transmuting it in some way. You're taking it. It's like being ground up and being transmuted. And that's what I find just so fascinating about it, because it actually does seem to do that. But it's a process. It takes time. We didn't get this way overnight, and probably we won't get out of being this way overnight. But just very, very interesting, the way in which change is happening and the ways in which we are responding to change. And I think the way in which this Saturn energy is making us reflect on not only the whole idea of the good old days, but the fact that even if we're not in that good old days mindset, there's still just certain things that, and sometimes there's a tension about the future too, because sometimes when we are very nervous about the future, we're just like, look, just leave me alone. I just want to stay here and be comfortable right where I am. Like, I just want to mind my own business, do my thing. Like, don't bother me with this crap. Like, I just want to do my thing. But there's a certain amount of, maybe there's certain areas where we can be left alone and not be bothered, but maybe other areas where, again, that Uranian energy that comes in and is like, no, we're gonna rip everything open, and now you're gonna have to figure out a new way. Now you're gonna have to, now the cliff you were living on has collapsed, and now you've got to jump. What are you gonna do? And so it's interesting, but also interesting that I see this as being couched lately in terms of dark feminine energy and the way in which that is going to, that is part of this process. And also things that we had been talking about in terms of what's kind of what was down is up and what's up is down. Drake Stratton kind of talked about that in Geosophia, where he had talked about the way in which around, again, that Roman Empire time when categories were shifted, and then the underworld moved to the sky and different things, and the way in which that affects our psychology. So I feel like there's just things that are going on that are supported by all these different systems in the mass psychology. There just seems to be this change, and really moving into this space where we embrace this kind of energy. This is an energy of freedom. Don't forget, dark feminine energy is. It can be about dissolution and destruction of what doesn't belong there anymore, but it's also about freedom. It's about sovereignty. It's about how do you live now that you're free. How do you live now that someone's not put you on an established path and told you how to do it? How do you figure it out? And we often want to look to a template. We're like, well, no, I want to see how that guy did it. Well, you're doing it your own way, and you're on the spotlight. You're the star of your own show there. So interesting stuff. But yeah. So just on a personal level, I just find it interesting that this is the kind of thing I'm getting into. Yeah, that this is kind of what I've been shifted into is working in this healing modality, and I'm putting a lot of energy into that because it is something that I'm like, yeah, this we can talk about a lot of things. I can sit here and talk at you in these live streams forever, right? But that doesn't necessarily change anything for anybody, and it's not that I should necessarily have the expectation that I am going to change anybody, because I don't know that my goal is to change anybody. You're doing great, thanks. I don't know what I mean, because ultimately people will take what resonates with them and leave the rest, like anything else. But I don't know. There just seems to me that this is a point at which we want to work with that energy of freedom. Speaking of that Osho Zen deck again, that there is a freedom card, and it basically shows the bars of a cage, and it shows these birds, but the one bar is cut, it's open. But the one bird is not coming out from the other side. And you see that metaphor in other places, like that visual metaphor of the idea that the cage door is open and you can leave anytime you want, but you don't do it. you know, and because you feel safer in the cage. And we have talked a little bit about the way in which, like I've talked about the fence jumpers, right? Like people who tend to want to move into other things. But even if we're fence jumpers, there are certain things where we just kind of say, okay, I don't know that I'm ready to move into that new terrain or into that new country or in that new space. We generally, there's always something that we're somewhat resistant to. But yeah, I don't know. It just feels like there's going to be a lot of change coming up, and that would mean that not only means more dissolution, but also more freedom in terms of who we are and who we want to be. And that may also be why politically a lot of people are moving more towards authoritarianism, because they're really resisting the idea that they're free and that they can do, because with freedom comes responsibility, right? Now you can't point to somebody else and say, oh, this sucks and it's their fault. Like you have to, we all have to kind of be freedom. We have to be responsible for what we do because we're the one doing it. So, I don't know, just some interesting ideas. I hope this doesn't seem too random and too diffuse to people who are watching today, but it's just, I started thinking about this idea of golden age, started thinking about the idea of Saturn, and that kind of, I'm going to say almost like I don't want to say dual nature exactly, but the way in which Saturn acts as this black sun, and the way that may be the way Saturn plays out right now, rather than the idea of, oh, Saturn's going to drag us back to the past and make us do something else that we weren't doing before. And so, like I said, I'm getting this information from these other sessions. I'm doing this kind of healing stuff, and I'm seeing what's coming out with people and in people towards that. And then I'm also just seeing what's going on in the astrology, and then also seeing what's kind of going on in the social picture, and interpreting it in the way that I do, as you know, if you watch Chthonia or listen to Chthonia, that I do that in terms of, I take this kind of depth psychology approach to it. But that's just, these are all just little pieces of the puzzle, but I find it interesting how they all seem to be kind of reflecting each other right now. Maybe that's the best way to put it. So anyway, we're at 107. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you have any thoughts on this, definitely I'm happy if you share them with me. I'm always happy to hear people's comments. If you have anything in particular, or any questions about it, or anything else, I can do my best with that. But yeah, so like I mentioned at the beginning, changes coming to Chthonia, a few more books available, a lot of work going on over on my other site, transitionlifecoaching.net. Oh, you're welcome. Always enjoy talking. I have 10th house Mercury. I just love talking all the time. So, yes, so so I'm doing that, and then eventually there's going to be that move of the Chthonia site. And yeah, new podcasts coming out on Patreon as well for members only, and there'll be also members only section on the other website as well. So, okay, back. So back to all the other stuff that I'm doing. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate all of you, and and have a great rest of your Monday.